The planet was a vast and desolate wasteland, its surface cracked and charred, scarred by eons of cosmic chaos. Jagged mountains pierced the skies, their silhouettes outlined against the haunting glow of a blood-red sun. In the distance, massive storms churned across the horizon, veiling the land in a perpetual state of uncertainty. Among the alien inhabitants, there was one universal truth. The planet was ruled by a force of nature unlike any other. They called it the Wrath, a dragon of unimaginable size and power, whose name alone struck terror into the hearts of all who dwelled there. The Wrath had slumbered for centuries, its massive form lying dormant in the heart of the planet's largest volcano. But now, the ground trembled beneath the feet of those who dared to approach, and the air was thick with the scent of impending doom. The dragon was waking. In the control room of a nearby research outpost, the human crew observed the readings on their screens. The tremors had intensified, and a faint rumble reverberated through the walls. Their mission had seemed simple enough at first, a study of the planet's biodiversity, its strange ecosystems, and its potential for human colonization. But now, the world outside was alive with menace, and they were all too aware that the true danger lay not in the planet's storms, but in the ancient creature that had awakened. Ellie, the youngest member of the crew, peered out the window, her wide eyes filled with wonder. At just 8 years old, she was far too young to understand the magnitude of what was happening, but she could sense the tension that gripped everyone else. The adults spoke in hushed voices, their conversations punctuated by nervous glances and cautious movements. Ellie, however, was not afraid. She had always been curious, unafraid of the unknown, and this planet, this strange, alien world, captivated her. She often ventured out into the wilderness, marveling at the creatures she encountered and the mysteries they held. But there was one creature that intrigued her more than any other, a beast whose name echoed through every corner of the galaxy with a shudder. The Wrath. She had heard the stories, the legends passed down through generations of aliens and explorers who had dared to venture here. It was said that the dragon could reduce entire cities to rubble with a single swipe of its tail. Its breath could scorch the land, and its roar could shake the very foundations of the planet. Yet, for all its terrifying power, Ellie had never been one to shy away from danger. She wasn't afraid of the stories. She wasn't afraid of the dragon. The crew's leader, Captain Harris, had warned her countless times not to venture too close to the volcano. "It's not safe, Ellie," he had said. "The dragon's waking. You don't want to get caught in its path." But Ellie didn't listen. There was something about the Wrath that called to her, a connection she couldn't explain. She had to see it for herself, to witness this creature that had become the stuff of myth. So, one evening, when the sun dipped below the jagged horizon and the shadows grew long, Ellie slipped away from the outpost, her small figure swallowed by the towering rocks as she made her way toward the volcano. The ground trembled beneath her feet as she approached the base of the mountain. The air grew thick with heat, and she could feel the subtle vibrations of the Wrath's awakening reverberating through the earth. Despite the rising tension, Ellie's steps were steady, her heart pounding with excitement rather than fear. As she neared the mouth of the volcano, the ground before her split open with a deafening roar. A wave of heat surged from the depths, and the sky above seemed to darken, as if the very atmosphere was bowing to the dragon's might. For a moment, Ellie stood frozen, her eyes wide with awe. And then, emerging from the smoky depths, she saw it. The Wrath. Its massive form loomed above her, its scales shimmering like molten lava, its wings unfurled like a vast, blackened canvas. The creature was like nothing Ellie had ever seen, its body a living mountain of power and majesty. Its eyes, glowing a fierce amber, locked onto her with an intensity that sent a thrill racing through her veins. The dragon's nostrils flared, sending a hot gust of air swirling around her, but Ellie did not flinch. She only stared back at it, mesmerized. The dragon's roar was deafening, shaking the ground beneath her feet and causing the very sky to ripple with the force of its power. Ellie's heart raced, her breath shallow. Yet there was no fear. She had seen creatures that were terrifying in their own right, but none had commanded her attention like this. For what seemed like an eternity, the two stared at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The dragon's great head lowered, its enormous nostrils flaring as it studied her. Ellie took a tentative step forward, her feet moving with a certainty she didn't fully understand. The dragon's amber eyes narrowed, and for a moment, it seemed as if it might lunge toward her, its massive jaws opening wide. But Ellie was unafraid. She didn't run. Instead, she reached out a trembling hand and, without thinking, gently placed it against the dragon's scaled nose. Time seemed to freeze. The ground beneath them stilled, and the air grew silent, save for the faint hum of the volcano's rumbling heart. The dragon, once a fearsome symbol of destruction, stood motionless, its eyes locked onto the little girl who dared to touch it. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not move. She remained there, her hand resting on the dragon's nose, her touch light, yet filled with an inexplicable sense of connection. From behind her, the distant sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. Captain Harris and the rest of the crew were close. But in that moment, Ellie didn't care. She had touched the wrath, and somehow, in some way, the dragon had allowed it. And though she didn't know it then, this act would change everything. The silence stretched on, heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Ellie pulled her hand away slowly, her gaze still locked with the dragon's. The wrath blinked once, its massive body shuddering as if awakening from a long, deep sleep. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised its head and let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound that resonated deep within Ellie's chest. It wasn't a roar of fury. It was a murmur of something else entirely. Ellie smiled, her small face alight with a sense of triumph and wonder. The dragon, it seemed, was not what everyone had believed. And somehow, in that moment, she knew she had found something that would change the fate of this planet forever. Ellie stood frozen, her hands still lingering in the air as the massive creature before her shifted. The dragon's amber eyes, once filled with rage, now gleamed with an unmistakable curiosity. For a long, tense moment, nothing moved. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as though the very atmosphere was waiting for something, anything, to happen. The alien landscape was eerily silent, save for the low hum of the volcano's rumbling core beneath their feet. Even the wind had stopped, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace between the human girl and the world's most feared predator. Captain Harris, followed by the rest of the crew, burst into the clearing, their footsteps heavy and urgent. They froze when they saw what had transpired. The dragon, towering and unfathomably powerful, appeared almost docile now, its massive form looming over the girl with an unspoken connection that no one could understand. "Harris, what the hell?" Dr. Tila, the lead scientist, gasped, her voice trembling with disbelief as she took in the scene. Her hand hovered over her communicator, poised to send a distress signal, but she hesitated, her eyes darting between the dragon and Ellie. Captain Harris was equally stunned. His usually stoic demeanor had crumbled into one of pure shock. He had seen the wrath in action, witnessed its terror firsthand, and yet here was the beast, its fury seemingly quelled by the innocent gesture of a child. He didn't know whether to order a retreat or try to make sense of what was happening. But Ellie was the only one who seemed unfazed. Her small face was alight with wonder, her eyes wide with awe, and she took a cautious step closer to the dragon. The crew members, too afraid to move forward, watched in stunned silence as she approached. The dragon's nostrils flared, its massive head lowering slightly, as if considering Ellie. The heat radiating from its scales was almost unbearable, yet Ellie stood her ground, her eyes never leaving the creature's enormous amber gaze. The tension in the air thickened as she reached out once again, this time with her fingers barely grazing the dragon's snout. The response was subtle, almost imperceptible. The wrath's great head tilted slightly, its massive jaw flexing as it let out a deep, low rumble, half growl, half purr. The sound reverberated through Ellie's chest, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the ground beneath them had shifted entirely, breaking down the walls between predator and prey, fear and wonder. "You." Harris stepped forward, his voice strained, but the words faltered in his throat. "Ellie, get away from it. You don't know what it could do." Ellie didn't look back. She had already made up her mind. "It's not going to hurt me," she said softly, as though speaking to herself more than to the crew. Her voice was a whisper, filled with conviction. The rest of the crew exchanged anxious glances, but none of them dared to move closer. The dragon had always been a creature of wrath, a harbinger of destruction that no one had ever approached without facing death. But Ellie was different. Dr. Tila, still wide-eyed, approached cautiously, her scientific curiosity outweighing her fear. "How is this possible?" she murmured, half to herself. "We've studied it. There's no logical explanation. No creature of this magnitude should be capable of such behavior." Captain Harris raised a hand to silence her, his eyes never leaving the dragon. "The last thing we need right now is a theory," he said. "We need to get out of here before it changes its mind." But Ellie didn't seem to hear him. She stood there, her fingers lightly tracing the dragon's scales, her touch gentle, almost reverent. She was more attuned to the moment than the adults who surrounded her, more in tune with the creature that towered over them all. It wasn't fear that held her captive. It was the strange, inexplicable sense of connection she felt to the wrath, as though it had called to her, as though she had been destined to find it. And perhaps she had. The dragon's eyes softened, its body relaxing just a fraction, but enough for Ellie to notice. It was as if the creature had recognized something within her, something pure, untainted by the fear and violence that had marked its long existence. For the first time in ages, the dragon seemed to breathe without the weight of its destructive purpose, and Ellie felt it in her bones. This was no monster. It was something more, something misunderstood. A sudden, sharp noise broke the fragile peace. Harris, his voice low and urgent, called to the crew, "Fall back. Now!" The dragon's eyes flickered toward the group, but Ellie held out her hand, as if to signal them to stay. Her heart raced, but her expression was one of calm resolve. The wrath had spared her once. There was something inside her, something she couldn't fully explain, that trusted the creature, something that didn't need to run. "No," Ellie whispered, her voice soft but firm. "It's okay. It won't hurt us." The crew watched in disbelief as Ellie stepped closer to the dragon, her fingers brushing across its jagged scales. The dragon didn't move, but its amber gaze followed her every motion. It was an intimate moment, one that stretched the boundaries of understanding between human and beast. But it wasn't just about the dragon. It was about Ellie, a child who had seen through the eyes of fear and found something else, something beneath the power and terror. The dragon shifted slightly, its head drawing back, as though considering its next move. Its great nostrils flared, and for a moment, Ellie felt the intense heat of its breath wash over her. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached out once more, this time pressing her lips gently against the creature's cold, rough nose. The world seemed to stop. The wind, the rumble of the volcano, even the sound of the crew's hurried whispers, all faded into silence. The dragon remained still, its massive body unmoving, as if caught in the magic of the moment. And then, with an almost imperceptible movement, the wrath let out a deep, resonant hum, a sound like the earth itself breathing, a sound of acknowledgement, of something long buried beginning to stir. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a threat. It was something more, a vibration that echoed through Ellie's chest, something primal and ancient. Ellie pulled back slowly, her breath shaky but full of wonder. The dragon's eyes remained locked onto hers, its enormous form still and silent. But the air had shifted. For the first time in history, the wrath had encountered something that calmed its rage, something that understood it, something that had reached through its violent exterior to touch the heart beneath. The crew remained frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Ellie, on the other hand, stood there, her small face alight with something far beyond the fear that had gripped the others. She had done it. She had bridged the divide. And in doing so, she had changed everything. The moment was far from over, but the world had already begun to shift. The crew remained at a distance. Their collective breath held as the dragon and Ellie shared a silent understanding that transcended their species. The planet felt different now, its very air charged with the weight of what had just transpired. The once unshakable fear of the wrath had turned into something more profound, something they could not yet name. Captain Harris's hands clenched at his sides, his mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. His training had never prepared him for this. The dragon, the terrifying, unstoppable force they had studied for months, was now behaving in a way that defied everything he thought he knew about power, control, and fear. And Ellie, the young girl they had all underestimated, was the key. Ellie took a small step back from the dragon, her eyes wide but calm, as though she had just experienced a moment of pure magic. She wasn't scared. No, she was beyond that. She had touched something that many had thought untouchable. In her heart, she knew she hadn't just pacified the wrath. She had unlocked a piece of its soul. The dragon shifted slightly, its great wings stirring the air, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. But instead of rising in fury, the wrath let out another deep, resonant hum, almost like a sigh of relief. Its enormous head tilted down, lowering to Ellie's level as if acknowledging her once again. The crew watched, uncertain of what to do next. They had always been taught to fear this creature, to treat it as an unstoppable force of nature. But now, in the presence of Ellie's innocence and resolve, they were forced to rethink everything. Dr. Tila, unable to suppress her scientific curiosity, stepped forward slowly. This is unprecedented," she muttered. "We've observed this creature for years, but nothing like this. Nothing at all." Captain Harris still couldn't take his eyes off the dragon. "I don't know what's happening here, but we need to get Ellie back to the ship. Now!" Ellie, however, wasn't listening. Her gaze remained fixed on the wrath, her hand trembling but extended once more, reaching for the dragon's face. The creature regarded her with a mixture of wariness and curiosity, its amber eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames within the volcano. There was an ancientness to the dragon that Ellie could feel in her bones, a deep, timeless sadness woven into its very being. "Ellie," Harris said again, his voice urgent but laced with disbelief, "come on, sweetheart. We need to go." But Ellie did not move. Her voice was soft as she spoke, but it was steady, filled with an understanding beyond her years. "It's not going to hurt me, Captain. It's different now." Tila and Harris exchanged a glance, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. They had both seen the creature's violent tendencies, had witnessed firsthand its destructive power. How could Ellie, who had no understanding of the planet's dangers, know something they didn't? But Ellie wasn't just some child. In that moment, she was a bridge between worlds, between human understanding and the ancient power of the wrath. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, echoed in the air like a melody that calmed the beast. The dragon, sensing the calm in her, slowly lowered its head to the ground, its immense body settling into a more peaceful stance. The flames in its eyes dimmed, no longer filled with the rage that had once driven it. Captain Harris swallowed hard, his resolve beginning to falter. For the first time since his crew arrived on this dangerous planet, he questioned his instincts. The wrath was no longer a force of mindless destruction. It had become something more, something he could not yet understand. "Ellie," Harris said quietly, his tone softer than before. "What are you doing?" She turned to him, her face full of quiet certainty. "I'm making peace with it. We can't be afraid of everything, Captain. This creature, this planet. They're more than what we thought." Harris opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. He had no answer to that. All the scientific data they had collected, all the research, all the assumptions, they had been shattered in the span of a few minutes. What Ellie was doing, what she had done, had transcended reason. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Tila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her skepticism was clear, But the awe in her eyes was undeniable. She had spent her life studying alien life forms, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She had believed in the dragon's invincibility, in its role as the ultimate predator. But now, Ellie stood before it, unafraid, unshaken. And the creature wasn't attacking. Ellie nodded, never breaking her gaze from the dragon. It's like it's been waiting for someone to understand, to see it for what it really is. The dragon's eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging her words. Its enormous nostrils flared once more, but this time, there was no threat in the motion. Instead, the creature seemed to be listening. The moment stretched on, heavy with the weight of Ellie's understanding, the dragon's acceptance, and the crew's bewilderment. Finally, Captain Harris, his mind still racing to process what had happened, let out a long sigh. "All right," he said quietly, his voice filled with resignation. "We'll stay, but we need to be cautious. We don't know what's happening here, and we don't know what this means for the future." Ellie turned back to him, her eyes wide with the untainted hope only a child could possess. "I think it means we're going to be okay." The dragon shifted again, this time with more grace than anyone had expected. It stood, towering over the group, but its movements were no longer filled with aggression. Instead, the wrath seemed to regard them all with an almost protective gaze. It wasn't the terrifying beast they had feared for so long. It was something else, a creature who had been alone for so long, burdened by a role it had never chosen. And now, because of Ellie, something had changed. The crew didn't move, not yet. They waited in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle over them. Ellie, in her unassuming innocence, had bridged a gap that no one had thought possible. She had made peace with the wrath, and in doing so, she had forged a path for something new, something neither humans nor aliens could fully comprehend. But for now, they simply stood together, the echoes of the dragon's deep hum reverberating in the air, a sign that something profound had just begun. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Ellie had not only tamed the beast, she had freed it. And that was just the beginning.